Wait, where? What? I'm in a box!
Oh no, not the box.
This is the Escape the Zoo podcast. With your host, Daniel Clark.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Escape the Zoo podcast, where we talk everything wildlife. Today's guest is Shem Compion, an adventurer, nature photographer, creative, author, and photography hide builder. He runs C4 Photo Safaris, a company with a simple goal to bring clients to the best wildlife locations in the best season with the best photo guides so you can take the best photos. We discuss a lot, from working with the BBC to capture lions hunting elephants for the Planet Earth series, to the struggle of rhinos in Africa, to even a story about a leopard attacking a porcupine. It's a super fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. So without further ado, here it is, my chat with the one and only Shem Compion. Well, Shem, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I'm happy we've made this happen. We've been going back and forth for a couple months now.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. And yeah, I'm glad we could actually find a date and a time to get it going. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion, and hopefully not too many hard-hitting questions about my dodgy past. No, kidding. But looking forward to a good chat with you.
Well, now I'm interested. There weren't going to be any hard-hitting questions, but now you've kind of opened the floor.
Yeah, you can Google them. Don't worry. No, I'm kidding. Nothing. There's nothing out there. Yeah.
Happy 2019. What are we? We're 7 days into the new year. 4 days. Oh, not
4
even.
days in. Yeah.
What's on deck for 2019? Anything particularly exciting?
Yeah, from a travel perspective, there's a few aspects to exciting. What new additions to the family, which is always exciting.
Yeah.
Also hard work.
Yeah.
But from the travel perspective, I'm looking forward to some new destinations that we've been looking at in Africa, and some of them a lot more adventurous, difficult to get to places. Because there's so many great places in Africa, but people are going there. There are more and more people going there all the time. And so I want to explore places that are off the beaten track, but still offer an amazing experience and an amazing photography. That's the most important part. You want to go there to get great images, as well as having an amazing experience at the same time. And typically within Africa, those few remaining gems are a little bit more difficult to access and get into. But when you're there, the jewels are very bright.
Is that typically government bureaucracy reasons that they're hard to get into, or is it more geographically, topographically, it's just hard to get into the physical location?
Yeah, you've nailed it pretty much. The political ones, or the geopolitical issues within certain regions, sort of preclude you from going. So the South Sudan, for instance, is a remarkable region to photograph in for a variety of reasons, wildlife and culture, but at the moment, way too hot. And no one's going in there. You just cannot. So probably if it had to settle down now, it'd probably take a few more years before tourism could get in there and really contribute to the area. So that's the one side. Yes, politics or geopolitical conflicts within areas are an issue. But the other side is some of the ones are just geographically difficult. Endangered in Chad, it's the middle of the Endangered plateau in the Sahara. It's just damn difficult to get in there. There's very few flights. Conditions, you're in the Sahara Desert. To find an operator or someone who can actually put up a tent for you and run a campsite for yourself, and a few people who might go, is difficult. It's the French-speaking part of Africa, so it's difficult from a translation point of view. But when you're there, man, oh man, the stories I've heard, phenomenal.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's also a little bit different when you're running a safari tour. There's certain risks that you personally might take, but you're not going to bring your clients along with you.
Yeah, and typically what we do is we will always go to a destination before running a safari there, so we actually know the lay of the land, and that's very important for these far-flung destinations. The places like the Masai Mara and the Sabi Sands in South Africa, once you've been to one lodge, you might as well have been to all the other lodges in the area, because the region is the same. But new destinations, new physical destinations, very important to get guides in. And we invest a lot of time and a lot of money to get guides in, our own guides in, to go and find and look at these places to make sure that to make sure that the logistics on the ground runs in the way we want it to run.
Right.
But you mentioned another point. You don't want to. What are the risks you're taking to get people into areas? We don't want to we don't want to take averse risks for people. We want to have people enjoy their time. But you go look at a place like Chad, and if you go look at the travel warnings on the government websites, Chad's like got a red circle all over it. It's colored in red.
Oh,
so,
really?
So it's like basically do not go. However, the country itself, when you're in it, traveling is very easy. People are very friendly. They have bad neighbors, and that's what gives them their bad reputation. So you have to weigh these up in certain times, and that's why when we send our guides in beforehand, we find out what the lie of the land is, and is it too risky to run a safari in there, or can we not ignore, but can we say, hey, there is a travel warning, but this is our experience on the ground, and come and join us.
And I think there's also the aspect of it too, where I would imagine that most of the conflict or the reason that it's hot is typically in the super urban major areas. And as a wildlife guide, you're typically going to the most remote places that you can go, where I could imagine a lot of the conflict isn't occurring. Yeah,
and that's the irony of it. We spend as much time away from the cities as possible, really. I mean, maybe it's just an overnight on the way in, then generally it's out in the bush where it's the safest place to be. And that's the same for Kenya, it's the same for Botswana, or not that any of those places have had bad conflict, but it's generally we spend time away from the cities for a long shot. Yeah.
What are this might sound stupid because it's a general quote for all of Africa, but typically in places like Chad and Sudan, is the hot disrupt or the difficulty in traveling there, is it largely due to civil conflicts, or are they inter-country political conflicts?
Each one is different, and we can go into
we don't need to
discuss it. But Boko Haram is in Chad, and in Sudan and South Sudan and North Sudan split from Sudan, and they've been at war, fighting with each other for a number of years. Sudan's I think still the youngest country in the world, so it's a very recent country to be proclaimed, but they've had their troubles with their neighbors who were once their own country. Yeah,
that makes sense.
So each one is specific to its own area. And we're starting off, I think, on the wrong foot within Africa, because Africa is not necessarily a war-torn place, and it sounds like it is by this discussion. But what we are doing is discussing the far-flung reaches of places to access, and often what prevents you from going to them is conflict, or sometimes what prevents you from going to them is the conflict in these areas. Right.
But let's get more on the positive side of things. And when you're going to these remote areas, is that, you mentioned that you've noticed things are getting busier and busier through your time leading these guides and running C4 photo safaris. How massive has the change been, and how frequently the wildlife is being visited in more the South Africas and the Kenyas of the world? And what is the main difference you're seeing when you're taking the time to go to these more remote destinations or less frequently traveled destinations?
Yeah. Well, the biggest change, I suppose, is the lack of wilderness that you notice, and the lack of the wilderness feel that you notice as these places get busier, as locations get busier. And some countries have excellent tourism management policies. South Africa and its private reserves, Botswana has got excellent policies in the sense that they've had a low impact, high price model that regardless of the demand, there can only be X amount or certain amount of people on the land at a certain time. So that really helps. But what happens then, of course, is the price goes up. Continuous supply and demand means that the price goes up. So that then prevents many people from actually going to those destinations. So, but I think the biggest example of me physically seeing a wilderness transform due to tourism is the Masai Mara, and that's in Kenya, and it's part of the larger ecosystem in the Serengeti. But the first time I went to the Masai Mara was in 2002, and in the early 2000s, when we would spend time there going on game drives, literally the whole afternoon you could spend with a family of cheetah, and it would just be your vehicle. And that wasn't magic. It was absolutely magic, simply because you had that wilderness feel. And that's a big part of what we'd love to do. We like to sell an experience rather than only photography. And that experience comes with the wilderness feel. But as more and more lodges came into being because of the high interest in the Masai Mara, those type of experiences are gone. And you pretty much, it's very, very difficult to find. Actually, I don't know if you can find it in the Mara, where if you have now a family of cheetah on an afternoon game drive to have one vehicle, it will be impossible, absolutely impossible. So I've just noticed how over the course of time, the greater number of people coming into the Masai Mara have turned it from a wilderness area into a game park where people are coming by and looking at the animals all the time. And it's lost that wilderness feel and that wilderness aspect. And that's quite an important part of the experience of Africa, is that wilderness feel. So it's more and more difficult. You're going to be a bit more creative in your thinking and the way you pitch and sell types of safaris, because you want to sell a wilderness feel, which is, I think, what we like to do and what we want to do. Right. Then you have to work a little bit harder sometimes. But the results and the reward is so much better.
It is an interesting thing, I could imagine, when you're planning them too, because different clients, I would assume, would want different things, in the sense that for me, I agree with you completely, where when I go, if I'm going to spend the money to go to Africa, I want to get out in the middle of nowhere and feel like I'm deep within the wilderness. And to be frank, like, obviously I want to see the animals, but if I don't, ultimately I'm still feeling like I'm experiencing a location that I never could go to before, and I'm kind of by myself out in the wild. Whereas I would imagine there's a certain clientele too that's sitting there and they get bored, or they're expecting to see something every 30 seconds, and you're like, well, that's not necessarily the experience that we're trying to offer, you know? Like, this isn't Pokemon Snap, or like something that is like a video game, you know?
Yeah, but luckily I think we attract the mutual types of people, in the sense that I say we want to take people and show them the wilderness. The more we say that, the more we do that, the more those types of clients come and travel with us. And so we get people with an understanding of what wilderness is, and are happy to enjoy those quiet moments. But when I say that, you know, we plan our trips very carefully so that we go to these wilderness areas in the right season, in the right time of year. So when you go in there, you're going to get wilderness, but you're also going to get great wildlife and sightings.
Do you find a direct correlation between the countries where wildlife tourism is much more prominent? So a South Africa, Kenya, do you feel like the wildlife in those areas is more protected than you would find in a Chad or a Sudan, and because there's so much money coming in to support that tourism? Or kind of the inverse, where you're finding that it's just making it easier to access the wildlife for poaching reasons, or the wildlife are getting pushed further off from their natural kind of way of being because there's cars surrounding them all the time?
It should be that the more tourists that come to a country, the animals are better protected. But it's specific to each country because of the way that they manage and handle the money once the tourism comes through. And I suppose the best example of a great tourism model is Botswana, where their national parks at federal level is excellently run, and the money that comes in from tourism is used to help protect those areas and manage the reserves as well. So that when you drive into the park, you can actually see it is being looked after. When I say being looked after, I'm talking about the entrances to the parks, the roads, and so on, just that the infrastructure is in place. And you've probably heard of the scourge of poaching that's going through Africa at the moment on rhino and elephant, Botswana has largely been untouched. Only now, in more recent months, has Botswana started to feel the impact of poaching. And that's because the poachers have gone to the other areas. They've done their jobs there. Now they're coming to Botswana. They're the last refuge, if you like, because they've also got one of the largest populations of elephants on the continent. So Botswana is a great example of tourism working to help conserve and preserve wildlife. That's on a federal level. Private reserves are amazing examples. I love them because physically they run it as a business. And so they see that tourism is as important as the wildlife. They go hand in hand together. And there's that fundamental connection between the two. And so they make sure that there's great anti-poaching and that the animals are preserved, conserved, and especially it becomes especially positive when these are in open ecosystems, unfenced ecosystems, because then you've got animals moving between private areas and federal reserves and so on. That it creates a larger wilderness experience, but everybody's working together and making sure that they've got tourists, they've got wildlife, and they've got the protection side, the management and the poaching, anti-poaching side.
And that model is best executed, you think, in Botswana, is that correct?
If you want to contribute or the wilderness aspect to it, yes. Because in South Africa, many of the reserves are fenced, so each reserve is its own enclave. This is an exception, because in the low-veldt part of South Africa, where the Sabi Sands and the Timbavati, they form part of a large fenced area, which is probably the largest fenced area in the world. I would imagine it's over 2 million hectares, or 2 million acres of fenced area. And so within that, there are their own wilderness area. There's no denying that 4 million acres is a wilderness area.
Yeah,
but it is fenced. it is fenced on the sides. Yeah.
And does that impact you think of the Great Migration of wildebeest or something like that? Are migration dynamics impacted by that fence, even though it's 4 million hectares?
Not in this case, no, because this was just this area in particular is a relatively flat, undulating countryside with lots of rivers that flow through it, and the rivers keep the animals there. The reason the migration moves is because of rain and actually the lack of water. So the animals have to move from the areas because of no water to areas where there is water. Wow. And so that keeps them moving around essentially in a circle. And if there were fences there or other obstructions like a big major road, that would prove to be disastrous.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into a little bit of specific moments that I've seen in your photography or videography that I'd love to learn a little bit more about. The first being that your content was actually featured in BBC Planet Earth. Is that correct?
I've done some work with BBC Planet Earth back when the first series came out. And it wasn't necessarily my content. The only content of me is actually myself.
Oh, really?
Standing as in one of the behind the scenes parts of the video. But we worked with the Planet Earth series with the BBC, and it was up in the Saluti in northern Botswana, where for a few years, every now and then, these lions, when specific conditions come together and the pride is large enough, they will actively hunt elephants as their main source of food.
Really?
Prey. Where in other parts of Africa, in Botswana too, it happens, but sort of on an occasional basis, opportunistic basis.
Right.
Where this happened for 2 seasons, these lions were hunting elephants as their main source of prey, and it was remarkable to film and watch. And I was there as a guide and driver and a sort of their lion expert, if you like, lion elephant expert. And our goal was to film this interaction and, of course, the big takedowns. to get this unique, very unique behavior. And I'll explain to you how unique it was. It happens for about 2 months in the year, the real hot months of the Botswana summer season, the Botswana dry season, September into October, when these elephants have to come to certain waterholes. And these waterholes, they get about 100 elephants all vying for some water. And these lions were a pride of about 23 to 26, depending on youngsters and so on. And they did it one season, and then the next season it happened again. And how unique and how sensitive it was to change was when we were there, one of the lions got bitten by a cobra, the male pride lion, and he died. And because of that, the pride dynamics changed. Other lions came in, separated and split the pride, and that was the end of that whole unique behavior. So it's just something as small as a snake bite can cause it all to disrupt. So there have been occasional other lions hunting elephants, but more on an opportunistic basis. We were there for 23 nights, and we watched them hunt almost every night they could hunt, and we watched them kill 5 elephants.
Oh my God.
Takedowns.
It's almost like that specific lion was like the Elon Musk of the Botswana elephant pride. Lion pride, where he's like, why are we doing what we've been doing for the last 100 years? Let's go after these big elephants.
Yeah. And you know what the beauty was? You could almost see evolution in process. And it's not evolution at all. I'm just using the word very loosely. But these lions had learned very quickly how the elephants responded. So their behavior from a hunting perspective changed completely. Normally you would have stealth, you would have ambush, you would be downwind of your prey, and you would use those to your advantage. You're camouflaged. So those are all evolutionary processes that predatory animals would use, and lions in particular are excellent at that. These guys were walking upwind of the elephants, because these elephants would be walking up to 40 kilometers to come to the water, and then they would walk 40 kilometers back. So they're highly stressed, they're dehydrated, they're weak from lack of food, because it's the end of the dry season. And they come to this waterhole, and now they've got to scrum in amongst all the other 100 elephants to get a piece of water. And you've got babies, and you've got moms, and you've got big bulls. And so it's a big bun fight. So what these lions did is they would walk upwind, and they would let their scent just drift into these elephants and cause mayhem. The elephants were running around and screeching. The noise was unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
Really?
And so these elephants, and they would create this pandemonium, and from there they could single out the elephant they wanted. They could see if one was super weak or had a limp, and it was uncanny how quickly they could do that. We would be watching this under the light of the full moon. So literally in the middle of the wilderness, it was like watching a play being performed out on a field in front of you.
Wow.
That's how clear it was. And these elephants would be split up, and they would just latch onto an elephant that looked in some way more distressed than the others, or weaker, showed signs of weakness, and just go straight in there. This is like parting the Red Sea. Elephants running in every single direction. The lions would leap onto them. And elephants, for their size, they have a lot of strength, but their strength in their legs is not that great. And put it this way, have you ever seen an elephant jump? No. but so what they call the recurve action of an elephant is quite weak. And a zebra and a wildebeest, they can kick. They've got strong recurve action in their legs. Elephants, no. So they'll just pile onto this particular species that prey that they've locked onto. And once it was down, it was down. It was game over. There's no ways it would get up again. It doesn't have the power to do so. Yeah.
I'm surprised it would cause such pandemonium with the scent if historically it's so infrequent that lions would hunt elephants. You think they'd be at a watering hole and be like, well, we're massive together, and not freak out when they get the scent of a lion.
Yeah, I've observed elephants many times. They smell lions, they freak out, or they smell cats, they freak out. They want to get it away. They want to get this unfriendly smell. In most cases, they would consider it unfriendly because they know they cannot do them any damage. Yet on this occasion, these lions were just taking full advantage of that. and all of them would be walking upwind. Yeah.
I think a common misconception in wildlife in general is that wildlife aren't really sentient beings, or that they're really just programmed behavior that evolution created over the course of millions of years, which a large part is true. But when you hear something like that, that's one specific lion that just happened to be able to communicate with an entire pride that we're going to do something different, and let's try and figure it out and learn about it and execute it and get better at it. It's really cool to hear that even that communication and understanding amongst a pride is possible, and that it's not strictly this biological function of an evolved lion brain that's doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I agree with you. To watch that behavior was spectacular for us, and to just try and understand it and observe it. The first time you think is this a joke? And I do it again and again and again. So you realize, wow, okay, this is something unique. And funny enough, we were working on this project with the BBC, but we also had the opportunity to, myself and a colleague that I was working with, in the dead hours, the quiet times, measure and look at all the animals the elephants that had been killed, and we went and looked at their skulls and their bodies, because it's very difficult to tell the gender of a young elephant. Basically, from about 7 or 8, unless the thing's excited and he's got his penis out, you can't really tell the gender at all. Sorry, you can, but when it's dead, you can't. When it's been eaten, almost impossible. So what we did is we measured all the skulls that we had there, of the kills that we had, and we managed to find, I think, about 32 dead elephants within the region that had been killed by these lions. And
32
in total. When we were there, the time that we were there, we had 5 kills and a number of attempts. Are
they coming close to eating the whole carcass? That seems like a shit ton of meat for 20 lions.
It's a lot of meat. It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. But this is over the course of a larger period, let's say 7 weeks or so.
Right.
But so what we got back was, we wanted the gender of each elephant, and we wanted the approximate age of each elephant from the skulls. And when we got back, we got them, all of them were young males, the elephants, around the age, all of them are males, around the age of about 13 to 16 years, which is significant because that's the young teenage males that are now being pushed out of the the maternal herd. And so they're at a very insignificant age in their not insignificant, they're insecure. Because do we stay with the maternal herd, or do we go and now be a loner and a scary out in the open all alone? And so that's where these lions, we figured out, we're actually targeting specific elephants. We saw them take out specific weak ones, one that came in with a limp one. And so, but all of these lions are males between 16 and 13 years of age. So they had preconceived this. So we actually did a paper, scientific paper that was published in a peer-reviewed journal about the fact that what it comes down to is that back in, let's say, 10,000 years ago, there is a concept of super prides, which are of lions. So lion prides up to 50 large.
Oh, wow.
And the big question that has always been asked about Africa, barring the fact, is that why did elephants not just take over? Nothing could kill them once they got over a certain age. And why did elephants not just take over? And you could say certain disease and so on, but there's more than enough food within the African savannah for them to do well. But this potentially answers the problem and provides a nice hypothesis as to why elephant populations never grew. Because if there were super prides of lions and they were targeting young males coming out of the maternal herds, they were naturally cutting out the part of the species that could reproduce.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Remember, male elephant, only comes into he comes into sexual attraction once a year. So his time to reproduce is limited. It's a short time. So, so this is a paper that we produced from that, hypothesizing that this was one of the reasons why elephants never really destroyed, when I use that word lightly or broadly, the savanna ecosystem back 10,000 years ago.
Well, it makes sense, right? I didn't even think about that. Or it makes sense as to why that was such a big question, or may still be. I mean, you think of how massive an elephant is, and you don't. That's why I was shocked to hear about the story in the first place, is you don't even think of anything going after it and trying to take it down. Like, I've seen a couple lions. I think it was Planet Earth 2, where they showed a couple lions trying to take down a giraffe, and the giraffe is nothing. Nothing close to the size of an elephant in terms of power, but it was a very formidable foe for a pack of lions. So I never even thought that was possible. Yeah.
So other than providing amazing footage, it gave us quite a lot of insight into the behavior of lions too.
Well, sometimes you look at those Planet Earth series and you're like, you almost think that the animals are actors at how freaking crazy some of this stuff can be. I'm always shocked at, like, you look at that, and I don't know how long they plan each Planet Earth series for. I'm assuming it's like 5 years, but
more.
Yeah. I mean, how do they even begin to understand that that's something that happened over a course of 2 years, completely unbeknownst to anybody, unless you're like really boots on the ground? Then the amount of people in the network they must have to really find out when this super interesting behavior is going to occur. It must be such a large scale operation. It's
massive, and a large part of the BBC research, comes down to research, and a large part of the kudos goes to the researchers. I've been in touch with them many times about various parts of behavioral anomalies within Africa, and the BBC researched their subject matter thoroughly, absolutely thoroughly. They want to find any aspect of uniqueness that is possible. So they really are always looking and searching for unique behaviors. Their network is very large, and they're very thorough in what they're doing. And when they latch onto something that is potentially there, they really try and drill as hard as they can into getting all the marrow out of that subject matter. They'll send guys in, they'll come and have a look, they'll make sure that it's all bona fide information. They really make sure that they find exactly what they're looking for. But to give you an idea, you talk about Planet Earth. Planet Earth 1 was, if I remember correctly, 10 DVDs, 10 episodes. Each episode was about an hour long, 60 minutes long. And this lion elephant section was 10 minutes on the Great Plains DVD. So 10 minutes out of a 10-hour production.
Yeah, it's crazy.
10 hours. And they committed 46 nights in the Savuti to filming that. 46 nights. Your own camp. We set up our own camp. We had to drive everything and fly everything in. You're in the middle of nowhere. But so that 46 nights makes up 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Out of a 10-minute series, and each one an hour long.
And I think what's crazy about that too is, I mean, that sounds absurd, right? 46 nights for 10 minutes. But you have to assume that lions and elephants are among the easier animals in that series to even spot and find unique behavior for, just because of the size and the geography of the region. Whereas you look at some of those things with, like, the smaller animals, like the snakes or like the octopus that's hunting the crab, and you're like, how long are these people chilling in these areas just like hoping to find something like this?
No, they spend an inordinate amount of time. You've got to give, they really are dedicated people and highly passionate. And I think that's, again, like you say, why the animals look like they are actors, because they've got so much great footage that in the end it almost becomes hard to choose what you need. However, they're quite strict on the script. They will send back footage to the editors, and then they'll say, okay, well, we need this shot, and this shot. And some of them are as absurd as, not absurd, but as demanding as, we need the shot of the lion taking down the elephant, and we need the elephant falling over. So you're like, well, that is the one in a million shot. but you got to go out and try and get it. And that's what they're looking for.
Because the crazier part of it too is every story in Planet Earth has a narrative to it, in the sense that it's not like, oh, I got this one camera with this one shot that showed this crazy thing that happened. There's like a preamble in the beginning, and there's like a plot line that comes to a conclusion in almost every story, and it's just crazy how it's not necessarily capturing one magical moment, but really that, I mean, it's heavily researched and figured out. I think they try and balance it. They try and feel what the storyline is going to be, and they adapt. They're very adaptable and flexible if they see that it's going in a certain way or not. Right.
Yeah.
Another crazy piece of content that I've seen, and I know you've gotten a lot of recognition for, but I'd never seen anywhere else, was this photo of a leopard attacking a porcupine with like full quills out. Can you talk a little bit about, is that normal behavior, and how could a leopard even go about trying to take down a porcupine that's got knives sticking out of it from every single angle?
It was just I think a unique sighting. Well, it wasn't a unique sighting, it was a unique combination of circumstances, and from a photographic point of view, unique combination of circumstances, and from a behavioral point of view. But what was nice about that leopard, he was a young guy. He was a young male. So curiosity is his like main feature in his life. And he's curious about everything. And what you don't see there is that 5 minutes before that, he was lying on this log in the most beautiful golden sunlight in a dry riverbed in Masai, in Botswana. And there was like, it was the best scene ever from a portrait point of view. This leopard was lazing. There was golden glow in his eyes. It was just amazing. It was phenomenal. And we were all going, wow, this is the most amazing photographic scene ever. And then down behind us, unbeknownst to us, this porcupine scuttles into the riverbed. And he was coming to feed on some roots that were coming out from the damp soil at the base of the riverbed on the far bank. And he had to cross the dry riverbed, of course, and that caught the leopard's attention. And the leopard, being a young, curious male, just also left his mom. He was like, that was perfect game for him. So it was a mixture of intent, curiosity, a predatory instinct, and a bit of play, I think. So all these combined for this leopard to have a good go at this porcupine. And the porcupine, I think, was quite experienced. I didn't ask its age, but he provided quite a good distraction, rattling his quills. And we watched about 3 times how the leopard actually got the quills in his paw and had to sit down on the ground and pull them out of with his mouth and so on.
Really?
But probably, so he was like stalking and trying to get around the front, and the porcupine was just showing him the back all the time, showing him the sharp end. And then the leopard would try and pounce over, and he would rattle his quills, and that's where you saw the leopard jumping in the air. And so, but what was also fascinating was that eventually the leopard lost interest. He was like, I've hurt myself too much here, and I don't want to be involved anymore. But the porcupine wouldn't leave. And it comes down to a word or phrase we use in the bush, sometimes too lightly. We say, whatever you do, don't run, because only the food runs. And this porcupine didn't want to leave, because if he had ran away, the leopard, just his natural instinct, would have said, okay, I need to chase this guy. And so the porcupine just hung about there and hung about. Eventually the leopard got up and walked away. This took 45 minutes, an hour or so. I can't remember exactly. But that was quite a nice ending, is that the leopard just in the end left. And the porcupine, they were like sort of next to each other, lying side by side.
Yeah, well, I didn't even think about it when you first said, before you said the saying in the bush. I was always like, once the leopard stopped having interest, if I were that porcupine, I would run like hell. And I've always been kind of worried about that too, because obviously, like, I'm talking to a lot of these wildlife photographers and cinematographers in the areas, and there's been certain scary moments where a bear, a grizzly bear in Yellowstone, or a wolf up in Canada comes just a little too close for comfort. And there is a large part of not running that allows you to be safe in those moments. I'm sure it depends species to species. So for anybody listening, if you run into a bear, or a wolf. Do not take my advice word for word. But I know that my natural instinct would be to get the hell out of there as soon as I possibly could, which means I'd probably be eaten in those situations. But it does worry me a little bit. Like, I wish I had more of the instinct to just kind of hold my ground there.
Be on your ground. Yeah, it's tough. I've had the same scenario sometimes. Every instinct tells you to get the hell out of there. And I think that's probably the right thing, to get the hell out of there, but don't let the animals see that you are
scared.
that you are the food.
Have you had any personal kind of scary moments like that where you just got a little too close for comfort?
No, I've bumped into animals. This is separate to actually being on safari, guiding safaris, but walking in the bush on my own, especially when I was younger. You tend to, I've had a few encounters, sometimes actually with funny guys like rhino, sleeping rhino, man, that thing's like, you don't see it until you're on top of it. Elephants have given us, but I've always tried to be a bit more cautious. I don't want to create too much disruption when I'm in the bush. So just using that as my guideline and my principle means that I'm staying away from animals rather than actually trying to walk into them.
Right, for sure.
Or staying at a point where that both of you are comfortable, should we say?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I've been charged by elephants a few times. Yeah, properly.
Yeah, that's a house coming at you pretty quick. That's a little worrisome. Yeah,
and one's probably the scariest. Not the scariest ones, but the scariest one was the one that was the most innocuous. Where it's the elephant bull. He was sleeping on his feet. We had actually photographed him, and we were walking away, circling wide around him, 50 meters away, 50 yards. So we were far enough away, and he was just snoring. Standing on his feet, snoozing away and snoring. And he just woke up. I think he got a scent of us or a whiff of us, and he just started running towards us. So we thought we could just flag him down. But he just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. About 4 meters away, we had to turn him away. Yeah, it was amazing.
Probably pretty pissed you woke him up from his nap.
Yeah, and it was like we were done and dusted. We'd like sort of been in a more precarious position with him, and now we were on our way out. And this guy just said, "Hey, I'm coming to take you out." Yeah.
What ended up happening? Was it like a false charge? Or he just wanted you to get away?
No, he just kept coming. We had to really make a big noise. All of us. There were 3 of us.
Oh my God!
Just shout and scream and throw our hats in the air and so on. And then he turned like at the last moment.
Is that a normal behavior to sleep standing up for them? Is it like typically?
Yeah. They don't sleep a lot. Elephants sleep sort of 2 hours a day, 24-hour period. So they snooze. They're snoozers, and very often they do it just resting against the trunk of a tree or so. The bulls, anyway, the younger elephants actually lie down. But he was just having a mid-morning snooze, standing up.
That's crazy. I heard giraffes were similar. Like they sleep like 30 minutes a day or something crazy like that.
Yeah. They don't need sleep like us. Yeah, we high functioning beings. Us.
I just wonder what it would be like to like not have to sleep very often. Like I feel like for humans, 60% of the day you're fighting the fact that you kind of want to sleep. So if you could live in a state of continued energy your entire life, that must be pretty awesome.
Yeah, although these guys like elephants and giraffe is a four-stomached animal. They are functioning and eating very low energy food and using very inefficient processes to turn over their food. So that's also one of the reasons they have to keep going. They just have to keep putting mass into their bodies so that they can actually get the energy out of it. They're working really hard. Our stomachs are quite efficient, and we can process and pull energy from a lot of different fiber, carbohydrates, proteins, and all those sugars. So it's a great way if you're just eating bark.
Yeah, it is amazing how...
Or grass, or leaves.
Right. You would think that the largest animals on Earth would be eating the most nutrition-rich, dense foods, but it's very similar with like whales in the ocean. I'm always like, how the hell is that massive being surviving on plankton? But for elephants, you think at some point in time they'd be wanting a taste of meat or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. But actually, just coming back to the leopard and the porcupine image, one other aspect of it that was that I always come back to when I see that photograph was that that was a unique moment in time from a photographic point of view, because I was using a Nikon D3 camera there, and that meant that I could push the ISO up to 3,200. I know it's a very technical point, but the D3 wasn't out the year before. And if I hadn't had that camera, I wouldn't have been able to get those photographs, because it would have meant the generation before, the higher ISO was, I think, 800 or so, which would have meant 2 stops of light less. And I remember I photographed that leopard porcupine. I had a 2.8 lens, so 7200 wide open, and at 160th of a second. So if I had 2 stops less on that, is 40th of a second. Very, very, very slow. And I wouldn't be able to get those shots.
Oh, that's crazy.
So it just meant, I would look back and just go, wow, technology really helped me there in that instance.
Yeah, and if you had any bit of a slower shutter speed to get more light in, it would be just a massive blur, because I can't imagine that paw striking the porcupine was particularly slow.
Yeah, exactly. It would have all been blurry. So it's very fortunate. Yeah, just the moment, that time, the D3 was out and I had it in my hands, and I could get a good shot. Yeah. That's
crazy. I wanted to go back a little bit too. You mentioned that rhinos can sometimes be somewhat of an innocuous animal to kind of come up on. How are rhinos doing in general? I mean, I feel like it's one of the it's almost replaced elephants as the large, very majestic animal in Africa that everybody's very concerned about. Do you feel any more optimistic being on the ground than you do just kind of as a general consumer of media?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm very glad that the message is being pronounced and is being proclaimed on that side of the world, because these animals need as much awareness as possible and support, because the other side of the answer is no. The battle is far from over, and rhinos are disappearing at a faster rate. They've just recently come out with some numbers that they're disappearing faster than their reproduction rates. So we are losing rhinos as a species. That's as simple as that. If an animal is not reproducing, if you're taking away faster than what it can put back into the system, it's a simple mathematical equation.
Right, that's how
or principle. It's going to disappear.
Yeah, that's too bad. And is it mostly poaching? Is that what the major concern is?
The major concern is, yes, that it's poaching, and it's poaching for the horn specifically. So, and at the moment, the horn, gram for gram, is more expensive than cocaine. It's more expensive than gold. So you're dealing with cartels and syndicates that are highly sophisticated. If you consider the drug industry, for instance, and the gold industry, those are highly developed syndicates and cartels that will stop at nothing to get their product to the end result. We've heard all the stories coming from the drug areas of how these cartels took over and what lengths they would go to get their product to their destination. And that's the same essentially with rhino horn.
Yeah, and that's why that was a big reason for my question earlier in this conversation, which was what the wildlife success rate was in a South Africa versus a Chad or one of the lesser frequented destinations. Because for me, I think my inherent guess would be that something in South Africa where a lot of the rhinos are on private lands, they're fenced off, there's armed guards taking care of them, that there'd be more likely to be successful populations there than in an area that might be a little bit harder to get to, but is not necessarily quite as policed.
Protected.
Is that true? Or is it, because the opposite could be true, where it's like easier to get to South Africa and find these wildlife because it's just more habituated into the culture.
No, the big issue, in my view, is that we hold all the rhino. So 90% of the rhino in Africa exist in South Africa. And so that's why the poaching is happening here.
Wait, can you repeat that? 90% of...
I stand corrected. I would say that 90% of the white rhinos in Africa exist in South Africa.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah. Botswana for many years didn't have rhino. They've only started reintroducing rhino into Botswana because of this problem. Kenya's got a handful of rhino, a white rhino. I think, the northern white rhino went extinct last year in Kenya.
Right.
And then they've got, I'm talking about white rhino here. And then throughout the rest of Africa, there's smatterings of them, literally handfuls of groups. Black rhino are slightly different, and probably 80% exist in South Africa. And I say that it's different because black rhino exists in a much more densely wooded, bushy environments, so they're difficult to find and difficult to poach and track. And they are more dangerous to poach and track because they live in these areas. So there's the counter to that. So white rhinos are easy. They live in open areas on grasslands. So from a poaching perspective, they're the ones that the guys want to target. It's
interesting.
Quite simple. Yeah, there's two types of rhino, and so that's why the bulk of the focus is here in South Africa, where there is literally a war. If you want to use that word, yeah.
Yeah, that's a horrifying.
Consider this, that in the Kruger National Park, on the boundary, on the eastern side with Mozambique, which is a long boundary, 400 kilometers, 300 miles odd, there are shots fired and engaged with poachers every single day of the year.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. It's almost you can't even comprehend how real of a scenario that is.
Yeah, so it's no joke. At all. Yeah. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's about every, I think, 15 hours a rhino is poached.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
I remember I was talking to James Burrell on this podcast, who's a conservationist, and he was saying that in his time in South Africa, it's like this palpable energy that's always over the region, because the folks the guides or the reserve owners in these areas, they're like constantly just crossing their fingers that they don't hear that gunshot, because they know it could come at any second, especially in the night. So anytime they were having a campfire or a barbecue outside, there's always this just constant fear in the background that you'll hear that noise, and that's that. Yeah. I mean, from the wildlife perspective, but also for a lot of these folks' livelihood and the protection of the other animals, that animal alive is just so valuable.
Yeah. So, it's a tough scenario in South Africa, and it's very real for us that are involved in conservation and tourism, where we like to have these animals as a value, and for the average South African too, because as South Africans, many of us grew up visiting the wild areas, the national parks, and those are our heritage. Like Europe has its cathedrals and its museums. We have our national parks. That's our heritage and our culture. And so white rhino and black rhino are very much part of our country and the heritage that we want coming out of our country. So to see them being poached like this is very sad. It's very sad for us to see. There's nothing that the average Joe on the street can do other than support it via donating money to a good cause. It's the guys on the ground that are having a seriously tough time. Yeah.
If you were somebody who wanted to support this for listeners, etc., is there certain groups or certain efforts that you would recommend above others?
There's one that we work with quite a bit in the background, and I would recommend them, not necessarily above others, and they're called Endangered Wildlife Trust. They've been around for 40 odd years. They're one of the more established conservation organizations within Africa, and they do exceptionally good work on the ground. Now, as I say, I won't necessarily recommend them above others, because there are other ones that are doing as good work, and some of them are specifically being set up for rhino. Endangered Wildlife Trust, as you can imagine, as the word says, is they're looking at cheetahs, wild dogs, various other species too. So, but they do have rhino projects too. If people are interested in donating money or contributing to a cause, just please do your research, because you want to make sure that you're giving it to an organization that's really going to use the money to actually physically prevent and help prevent rhino poaching and help the species survive.
Yeah, well, I'll link to that group in the show notes for anybody listening that wants to check it out.
That'll be great. Yeah, EWT is they're generally known as EWT, Endangered Wildlife Trust.
Okay, awesome. Will do.
Yeah,
I noticed in a lot of your tours that you spend time with some of the indigenous cultures, like the Masai and the Datoga. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the state of indigenous peoples within Africa and how that interaction typically unfolds?
Yeah, definitely. The tribes within Africa are, I would say, in a constant state of flux, and many of them have been marginalized sometimes very often by the government, because the governments don't know what to do with indigenous tribes still. The Masai are pretty much an anomaly, because they are so famous that they almost contribute to the tourism revenue within Kenya, and they've assimilated quite strongly into life within Kenya, although within Kenya there are some pockets of areas that are still very much Masai land and very much difficult to get to, and pretty much not visited by Western tourists. But like, for instance, the Datoga, which you mentioned now, they're a small group of people, a couple of thousand that remain, and they're trying to live out an existence in an area where nothing much happens it's not an arable area. It's not a very arable area to live in. They're squashed in or hemmed in by other tribes on either side. They've got the Maasai to the north. They've got various other tribes to the south and the east. Or they've got cities, or they've got national parks that they aren't allowed to go into. So there's the constant squeeze on these groups of people. Let's just look at the Toga, for instance, from all sides. And so eking out an existence as an authentic living tribes person is very difficult these days. And I've noticed going to the tribes with a Datoga that, like, the facial scarification, which is the sign of a Datoga, has stopped with the youth. So it's not happening anymore, because they're engaging with Western people, they're seeing Westerners, they're seeing other tribes, and so they stop doing their own practices because they're just becoming more assimilated into the global world.
Right.
And the biggest sort of spotlight on that is the Omo Valley in Ethiopia, where even within 20 months, I was there in January last year, and I was there in November now. So within the 20-month period, the amount of change I noticed was unbelievable of Western influence coming in. And unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about that. That is the only constant there is change, and it's coming like a freight train. So to access these areas, to get tribes these days that are 100% authentic, if you want to use that word when I say authentic, sort of unhindered and untethered to the Western world, it's now coming down to helicopter type of stuff within Africa. Yeah, all the people and all the tribes that you're accessing are these days 100% accessed, and they have access and will be seeing other Westerners.
Interesting. So when you mean helicopters, there's still tribes within Africa that largely don't interact with the Western world and live.
Yeah, well, and that's simply because of access. I had a double-edged sword recently. I fell in the Omo Valley off a cliff, and I knocked myself out, and I had to be medevaced. So I cut my head really badly. I blacked out, and I had to be medevaced out by a helicopter. So this is like the first helicopter medevac in the Omo Valley forever.
Oh, wait,
It's
how
pretty much
did
the
that
first-
happen? You were just walking in the dark and
in the dark, a freak accident, yeah.
because I saw that on Instagram. You were like, I'm sorry, I've been quiet for a little bit, but had a bit of an episode.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. So we were 40 kilometers from the Sudanese border, and it's a very remote area. And the double-edged sword was, of course, I had to be medevaced out. There's a big drama getting a helicopter in and so on. That's the one side. Then we took off in the helicopter, and my interest peaked up immediately. I wanted to see how remote we really were. And so we flew for 30 minutes back towards Addis, towards humanity, and there were no roads, not one road, just hills and hills and hills. And we were flying very low, and I was watching all the villages and seeing that the tribe, in particular there is the Suri tribe, which are one of the lip disc tribes. And at 30 minutes afterwards, we flew up this big ridgeline going over an escarpment, essentially. And at the top of that, I saw some huts. We were very low, like 50 meters above them. And these Suri people were living there. And that to me was like, those are the people that are untouched, because there's no vehicle tracks in there at all. I was very observant about that fact. And that's with the next frontier, or the last frontier, I would say.
Wow.
If you wanted to find tribes that have not had experience with Westerners in Africa yet, there's very few pockets available. Luckily, I had a GPS with me, so I know where they are now.
Wow, that's crazy. I had no idea. And when you bring a tour group to visit with the indigenous tribes, what is that interaction typically like? Do they speak similar languages, or do you share meals?
I've just explained something that would be very, very sensitive. If you had to go into that type of scenario, which I've just explained now, you'd do that in a very sensitive way. A private, small group of people, when I say small group, 2, maybe 3 other people, and you would have, there are like local tribes guys that are translators and work as guides for you. So the areas we go to, they're difficult to access, they're very difficult and remote, but you're driving in and there's a small network of guides that will help you. They speak Amharic or they speak English, and then they can help you and guide you into the villages, so on. But almost all these groups of people have had interaction, the ones that we take groups into, with other Westerners, so they understand what it's all about, and they know that we are coming. They know that, or they understand how to work with Westerners. But if you're going into, say, the helicopter type last frontier, then it's a whole different ballgame, because then it almost becomes an anthropological excursion rather than something photographic. And I've worked with a number of tribes now, and sensitivity is one of my major concerns and points of contact and interest.
Yeah, and that was my interest in the sense that it seems like such an important cultural experience that people can have to really understand. I mean, I think the more exposure you get to various different cultures is just an incredible thing that you can do as a human. But at the same time, there is that sensitivity of how do you maintain the integrity of the culture when almost by, you know what I mean? It's almost it's a double-edged sword, like you were saying. Yeah,
it is. And I have no qualms in visiting groups of people. And I've been to villages where we've been asked not to photograph, and so you don't photograph. And so then you just go and experience it, because if they don't want you to photograph, it means that they're valuing something more than a photograph. They're actually valuing the interaction.
Right.
So that's where I'm coming from. I'm there to value the interaction with them. And I most times when we go in, we just first 20 minutes is, guys, let's not even pick up the cameras. Let's put the cameras down and interact. And that's where you realize that humans are all the same, because initially the barriers are there. Then you might pull out your iPhone and show them pictures of your little boy. You see a lady with a little girl, and you show them pictures of your little boy the same age, and they go, whoa, then the barriers just drop so rapidly, and the interaction starts, and they want to see the videos, and they don't care about this device. They're actually just connecting on the human level. And so that's where if you can make that human connection, and there's various sort of ways we can do that, even just playing a game with juggling stones in the air.
Right.
And, because they just notice that you're doing something that they do. It's simple things like that. Just to make sure, not just to make sure, but just to make sure that there is that human connection. Then the barriers fall away, and it's amazing what you can talk to a person about without actually speaking their language.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
Yeah,
and it is something really special about how when you travel to different cultures, obviously there's that desire to learn and understand different ways of life. But I think the more and more time you spend in certain areas, you start realizing more and more that everybody's so directly related and correlated and similar, more so than different, which is really what the initial instinct as to why you want to explore different places is to find differences.
Yeah.
But you'll likely find more similarities, I guess is what I'm saying.
You find more similarities. You're quite right.
So are you okay after that cliff fall? That sounds scary.
No, I'm fine. 100%.
How far of a cliff fall was it?
About, what's it? About, I'm just trying to think in feet now.
Yeah.
About 9 feet.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
Yeah. It wasn't fun when it happened, but it was. I probably dodged a bullet because I hit my head on a rock, and if I'd hit it in pretty much any other way, I would have been knocked out. We wouldn't be having this podcast. Probably. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a good test of the Medivac system in Ethiopia.
Yeah. Jeez. It's surprising how they could get something out there so remote. How long was it? Like, it sounds like it took a while to.
Well, it happened at night, so we only managed to get it the following day. It got back that evening. Yeah.
Oh, damn.
So it happened, but it made you realize how remote you were. There was no ways we could get it out that night. We only made the decision the next morning anyway. But I think, the helicopters can't fly at night. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the ones that they had couldn't fly at night.
I'm glad you made it out okay.
No, thanks. Yeah.
Is there a moment that kind of sticks out throughout all your travels that is one special moment where you're just very present and could recognize that you're just incredibly lucky to do the type of work that you're doing and kind of the importance and the value of wilderness?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think there's two probably, Daniel. One is landing on the shores of South Georgia in the Southern Ocean and being confronted with 250,000 king penguins, big seals all over the beach, elephant seals fighting, bird life. You have to pretty much wade through these animals and poke your tripod at them to get to the 250,000 king penguins beyond the beach line, because the beach line is littered with these elephant seals and other seals. And that was a big moment in the sense that to think, wow, this place exists, because you cannot fathom it until you are there. And it feels like you're on a different planet. That wildlife accepts you and ignores you. And you can, if you lie down on the ground, a seal will sliver over you, a bird will come and peck at you, and penguins come and inspect your lens. They're bending over to come and to nibble on you. So that moment and that at South Georgia is really seminal when you realize that this is how wildlife is and was. How it was in many places in the world, and how it is in a place like South Georgia where it hasn't been disturbed.
Yeah.
So
There's like part of it that's incredibly exciting is the fact that those places still exist. And I'm dying to get South Georgia has been, from several people who've been on the podcast, one of the most harped, most beautiful places where you can get that genuine interaction with wildlife. But on the other hand, it's almost like there is always that sadness that you're like, you hear those stories of people who were bringing boats into harbors and couldn't go in because there were so many whales in the ocean. And you could like reach down, and I remember where were they talking about? I think it was Newfoundland. I was watching Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown last night, and they were saying that the cod was so rich back in the day that you could throw in a hook without bait on and catch a cod. That I'm not trying to be negative. It's always sad thinking about how proliferate, how incredibly magnificent it must have been when wildlife was fully populated. But it is super exciting and cool to know that there's still a few of those places out there. It's just, unfortunately, some of the harder places to get to.
It is, yeah. And another one that I really enjoyed greatly, more just a moment, because again, it's the sentiment to me was that one of fragility, and that was when I walked up to a volcano in Ethiopia called Erte Ale. It's I pronounced it wrong. Right up in the Danakil Depression, and it's an open lava lake, bubbling and boiling, and I was the only person there except for my guides.
Wow.
I got there in the middle of the night, or probably it was dark, and to look down into the depths, and it's almost like the bowels of the earth, and that you realize how fragile life is, because this is the start of life. This volcano, this is the thing that created all the land mass on this earth, really.
Right.
If some of that had landed on me, it would have burnt me away completely. So it was just that I was really struck by watching it, and I watched it for like an hour before I even photographed anything. I just wanted to really look at and see and know and understand, try and get an understanding of what this earth is. And it makes you consider that if it wasn't for a few, so if there were a few small elements that were different in this world, it would be inhospitable and uninhabitable. We wouldn't be able to live on it. The fact that water and air are the two fundamentals of life here. If they had just been one element on the periodic scale different, we wouldn't have had life. That we wouldn't have existed on here. So those are the type of thoughts you have when you stare into this belching volcano that's spitting out death, but at the same time creating life.
Yeah, if you take the time to actually think about the number of factors that go into you as an individual being and living on Earth, it is one of the most astronomically unlikely scenarios of all time, from one, Earth just being formed, but two, the fact that you as a person are alive. It's absolutely mind-blowingly crazy. I don't know, I think it puts perspective on how lucky we are that this is even possible in the first place. But no, I agree with you. And so that's the type of thoughts you had when you stared into a volcano. And something that I appreciated that you said there, but you've said it a few times in the podcast, is that you didn't pick up your camera initially, and that you really took time to be in the moment. And I think as content creators, or as people who just like appreciate what you're looking at, a lot of times it's such a hard balance to find. I mean, I was in Death Valley for New Year's Eve, and I constantly was struggling with the fact that everything I was looking at was so beautiful, and my first instinct was always to capture it and put it on my phone. And I was looking around, and literally everybody, especially in the more frequented spots of Death Valley, you'd see 100 people, and everybody has their iPhone out taking pictures of it. And you're almost like, at a certain point, the whole point of, at least for me, the reason I go out into national parks or I go out into wilderness is to get away from all that shit. So it is such a hard balance to, at the same time, like, I love creating content and capturing photographs and images and videos that I can always keep with me, and it's like a expressive form of art. But at the same time, you really need to be present to the moment as to like why you're there and what's important to you about being present in that wilderness place, you know?
Yeah. And I only picked up a camera I've been photographing for a while, but I think I was 26 years old or so.
Oh, wow.
But my point is that that before that, I was out with my binoculars all the time. And the binoculars were my window to the world. I was exploring and wandering around and looking at birds and animals and so on. And so I was a naturalist more than a photographer. And I've always maintained that's my focus and my core of what I've always done is I've been out in the bush as a naturalist, and then the photography came later.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I have a friend he's a bird watcher, and I think growing up, most people who aren't into that, they're just like, what a strange hobby. But he's saying that like he would go out with his dad, and when they were camping or traveling anywhere, that with binoculars, when you actually find a bird and are able to watch it, it's just one of the very few moments that you can really be super present to what's going on in that moment. And that, yes, the bird is the focus, but it's really just the ability to kind of quiet the mind. It's almost like a meditative type of experience.
Yeah.
I'm getting too spiritual on the podcast. Everybody's thinking I'm practicing Buddhist philosophies over here. I want to talk a little bit about C4 and your work. Can you explain a little bit about what your tours are like, what your photographic guides experiences are like for folks that might want to take part in something like that?
Sure, yeah. I'd love to. And I would like to say that, I must say that our safaris are designed to be very simple, really. And that is give you and take you to the best photographic location in that region, and give you the best photographic guide so that you can take the best photographs. That's drilling it down into one line and one sentence and being pretty boring about the adjectives that I'm giving you. But we like to give you a private guided experience on a scheduled safari. So we keep our ratio of our guides to clients quite low. Sometimes like one guide to 2 clients, sometimes very, very often, or on different safaris, 1 to 3. So it's a very low ratio. And we have no prejudice. You can be an iPhone user or you can be a professional photographer. And we've had many of both. We've had many award-winning photographers, and we've had people who have just rocked up with their iPhones. And what our focus is to say, let's go to this environment, let's understand it, let's appreciate it, and from that, let's take great photographs back. And I find there's 2 types of photographers in this world. There are the ones who want to photograph and will do anything to do it, to get it. And then the others who will go to an area and assess the conditions and find ways to make great photographs from those. And I try to convert everybody into the latter version of that, because if you're just going in there with a focus on getting a specific shot, you tend to ignore so much more around you, the beauty of the environment. And I find that has worked very well for us in the past. We focus on preparing our clients as much as possible for the area that we're going into, making sure that they understand what they get themselves in for, and then when they get there, give them an absolute whale of a time. Of course, we have a lot of fun on safari too. We don't just be very serious. We have a lot of fun on safari, but I want to make sure that our clients come back with great photographs and great experiences. And so far, that's worked very well for us. We have a very high repeat rate. 75% of our clients come back.
What?
And many of them...
That's an insane number.
So we've got but we've got a group of people that love to travel with us. And very often, as in sort of 1 out of every 3 safaris, or maybe 4 safaris, we'll have 100% repeat clients on the safaris.
Oh my God.
So that's, which is brilliant for us. It's wonderful that people keep coming back. And another thing I always push, and this is what I'm, as a guy who runs a company, we never want to be complacent. And I don't use that word. I want to keep aiming to improve what we deliver each time. So we always adding to what we can offer on the safaris. But the guides that we work with are, by my admission, excellent, exceptional, and many of them the best in their specific niches and genres of what they're working in. And that makes a big difference, because I can be traveling next to Isak Pretorius, who's a notoriously good bird photographer, and I would consider myself a good bird photographer too, but he's seeing bird images so much better than I am. and he's translating that into images with the clients that are going on a bird trip. So he's the best man in the business for that, and so they're getting all that wealth of experience that he's got. So we obviously tying our guides up to the specific tours so that their skills are maximized.
Hell yeah. Well, that sounds...
And maximized and brought to the fore. Yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. I am linking everything to C4 in the show notes. So for people who do want to go on African safari, highly recommend checking out Shem's Compion company. I keep going. I wanted to say Shem's company, but it kept my brain kept automatically going to say your last name. So I was mixing Compion and company, and I tried 4 times and couldn't do it. But anyways, for folks looking to do that, definitely check out C4 Safaris. I want to go in quickly to wrap up here into some rapid fire questions that I ask at the end of every podcast.
Sure, yeah.
Favorite wildlife book and documentary or documentary. So we can throw in a book and a documentary, or just choose one or the other.
Well, actually the book is not necessarily 100% wildlife, but it's I've just forgotten the name of it now. John Hone is the author. He's a South African guy. He passed away about 4 years ago, and I'll come to the title now. It's a book on the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa, which is a large mountain range, very spectacular. But he spent 25 years producing this book, and it's a guy who loved the mountains. He loved the wilderness of these mountains, because when you're on top there, there's no support. There's no one about. It's a serious hike up and a serious hike down. It's at least a full day walk up and a full day walk down. And so he spent these hiking trips up there where it snows. You have very bad inclement weather, and he got photographs that no other person in this country has got or will ever get. He dedicated himself to producing the best photographs out of this wilderness mountain area, which is very dramatic. They are very dramatic mountains.
Wow.
In South Africa. And it's called Into the Dragon, because the Drakensberg name translates into the Dragon Mountains. It's an old Dutch word. So he produced this book that is just a once-in-a-lifetime piece or work of love, of passion, and of dedication. And he was fortunate enough to have it published just before he died. I think he died about 2 years later. He just died of cancer. Not just, but he died of cancer, which came up quite suddenly. But it won't be repeated because you need the unique combination of skills of being a great photographer. He photographed it in with medium format. I mean, he was carting this stuff up, these mountain passes, medium format cameras and large tripods in the film days. And then spending weeks up there sometimes with a mountaineering club. So he had to be a very good climber, he had to be a very good photographer, and a very good climatologist to produce this book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite books. I often go back to it and just page through it. It's a coffee table book. Yeah.
I think what always fascinates me on people that shoot film too, which I actually didn't fully grasp because I've always done everything digitally until I was talking to Ken Geiger, who's going to be the podcast right before yours, who used to be a director of photography at Nat Geo. And he was saying that to go out to these remote locations and never have the instant feedback from digital, you could be shooting film. You could hike up to the top of those mountains and be shooting all this film for weeks on end, and then find out that you had a broken shutter, or for some reason you were overexposing or underexposing everything, and then everything's just shit. And you're like, I just spent $10,000 to go to this location and do all this work. And you come back and you physically don't know the product of what you've created until you get back. So I think experiences like Into the Dragon, like you're mentioning, where this guy is hiking up to these crazy locations and shooting on film, when you think of that element that he didn't even know what these images completely looked like until he got back, I think is super special. And something that won't be replicated ever again, because it's why would you want to take on that risk, you know?
I photographed quite a lot in the film days, so I understand that. It was interesting, interesting times, but exact same scenarios. Yeah.
Crazy.
But the best documentary, I think the documentary that made the most impression upon me was Eternal Enemies as a youngster, and I saw it many years ago by Derek Joubert, and I think Beverly Joubert at the I can't remember if they were working together or not. I was too young, but that just made a massive impression on me. And ironically, it was taken mostly in the Savuti in Botswana, where the lion elephant scenario that I worked on was also taken.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's one of the best of all time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Next 5 years, what any big exciting new projects that you're looking to take on?
Yeah. Well, we've got one big project. I've got one big project that I'm going to be taking on this year, but I can't say too much about it. So that's pretty exciting for me, but not for you at the moment. But I am looking at producing a book that is more than a field guide. Most of my books that I've done so far have all been on the field guide basis, translating wildlife photography into information, and that's helping to teach people about photography or nature guiding. The latest one is all about nature guiding and understanding wildlife using images. So the next book project, and that'll probably be out only in about 5 years' time, will be specifically on a large coffee table book. That'll be something akin to what I spoke about this other book called Into the Dragon, where it will be a legacy project specifically on one aspect of Africa, a thread that runs through Africa that connects many great wildlife areas, almost all of them together. So that's a project that I'm working on, and probably be out in 5 years' time, I'd say.
So I'm assuming we can't find out what that thread is for a few more years.
Yeah.
I figured I'd ask. Very cool. I'm sure. Hopefully, we'll talk. We'll have you on the podcast again 5 years from now when that's coming out, and maybe a few times in between.
Talking about a new book.
Yes. Yeah. And then my last question is, if you could put a billboard on the side of a major highway that disseminates one message in 10 words or less, what would you use that space for?
I would just say that we are here on Earth to create, not destroy. It's as simple as that.
I love that.
Yeah, and because it's we are here to create as humans, but we have the ability to create. We have a unique ability to create, but also that also touches the photographic side. I mean, think about from the photographic side. When you go out, you're creating. You're being a creative. But we want to create. We want to celebrate. We don't want to destroy. Why? Yeah.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it that I've never heard before. So with that being said, thank you so much for being here. I hope at some point in time to take one of your guided tours. I think it would be an amazing experience. I think everybody else should check it out. I'm going to link to your business as well as your personal website, Instagram, Twitter, etc. in the show notes. So if anybody wants to learn more about Shem's work, definitely check it out. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, stay wild. Thank you so much for listening. I honestly cannot express how much I appreciate you taking the time. For all information regarding this episode's guest, social channels, books, how you can support, etc., please check out our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please subscribe to the podcast. We are everywhere that you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Escape the Zoo on YouTube, follow Escape the Zoo on Instagram, like Escape the Zoo on Facebook, and please share with your friends. It honestly goes so far and means so much to me. And lastly, if you'd like to be emailed with each new podcast and any other major Escape the Zoo updates, visit escapethezoo.tv and sign up for our email list. Thank you.